Today I'm interviewing Dr. Richard Aach. Dr. Aach is a prominent Missouri internist, although he spent a significant part of his career outside Missouri. After training at Washington University and being on the faculty here for a number of years, he assumed positions being chief of medicine at Mount Sinai in Baltimore and professor at Hopkins, and then subsequently chief of medicine at Mount Sinai in Cleveland, and professor of medicine at Case, and at the end of his career was in the dean's office overseeing resident wellness and placement, I believe, but we'll hear more about it as he goes on. So to get started, where were you born?
Right here in St. Louis.
Which hospital?
Jewish Hospital.
There you go. I think before the baby factory on Ballast sprang up, Jewish Hospital was the best maternity service in the city.
Right.
So, and where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Clayton, just south of Washington University in the DeMont area, right off Skinker, and spent almost all my childhood there in an area that known as the children were known as the Raspberry Rats, but we were quite well behaved. And,
what did your folks do?
my dad was a podiatrist, and my mother was a housewife. She, after my sister and I were raised, she helped him in his office. He had an office actually at Famous and Bar in downtown St. Louis on, I think, the 9th floor. And I used to go down and roam through Famous and Bar and then spend time in his office. It was a fun thing to do for me when I was young. Used to take the bus down.
What was that part of what made you decide you wanted to become a physician?
Well, you know, it was a paramedical environment, but a real reason for deciding on medicine is basically through friends of my parents. They were older. They had a son who was a physician who actually during World War II was a lieutenant commander in the Navy and was overseas. But we used to go over and visit his family, and I'd go into his office and browse through his medical books. And then when he returned, and I was a little older, I realized he was really a very special person, a great role model. He really, I think, sparked an interest, so that the time came when I was in high school, I decided to choose to go into become a pre-med when I graduated, which was a kind of naive decision, and because I really didn't study much in high school, wasn't a very good student, and I learned the hard way my first year at Washington University. I think my first semester I was hardly passing, but then I learned how to study and apply what I knew. And after that, school became easier, and I did well in school.
You decided to stay at Washington University Medical School?
Well, I was accepted both Washington U and St. Louis U. I don't know if you realize, I was married my senior year in undergraduate school. We had no money, and we couldn't afford to leave the city. So we I applied to both programs in I think it was somewhere like the end of my second year. And I was accepted into both programs at the end of my fourth year and chose Washington University.
And then after medical school, you did your residency. What was it like being a medicine clerk back when you were on the medicine service at Washington University?
Oh, it was hard. We were on and off every 24 hours. So and that meant being at the hospital more like 16 to 18 hours a day for the year. I think there was only a 2-week vacation. It was exhausting. And there were times I was wondering why I had chosen the profession I did. But survived it and learned a lot during the year. It was financially anything but remunerating. I think I earned $25 a month as an intern. And then with tax, it came out to about $18 a month.
What year was that?
Let's see, I graduated from medical school in 1959. I entered in 50, graduated from college in 55, medical school 59, right? Intern 1959, 1960.
You were on the medical service, on the ward service at Barnes Hospital. Is that where you trained?
Right, yes. Yes, there are, I think, roughly 12 interns, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's correct. There were people who are listening to this may not realize that at the time Barnes had two medical services. It had the ward service, which was more prestigious, some of the Osler service at Hopkins, and a private service, which was less so, more like the Marburg service at Hopkins. And at $25 a month, that actually is similar to what Alvin Feinstein told me once that he earned at PNS when he was an intern.
Right.
And you missed the Medicare run-up, the funding that helped support residency training. So how did you get by on $25 a month? Were you subsidized by your family, or was your wife working? Or?
Well, no, we had our first child as a graduation present from undergraduate school. I think he was born 3 days after I graduated.
Wow.
So Jan did not work at that time. She had worked beforehand, but we were subsidized in part by the family, but not very much. But I think I had, although through medical school I had a scholarship, but and tuition wasn't that high. But I think the family subsidized us. But we were living very frugally, as you can imagine, and spent a lot of time at the hospital eating our meals there.
So what was tuition at WashU when you were a medical student? Do you recall?
I don't remember. I think it was something like $500 a semester for medical school. I don't remember the exact amount, but it seemed like a lot at the time, but compared to today, it was a drop in the bucket.
So you would have graduated several years before Jerry Medoff. I think he once told me that he made some money working in the blood bank or drawing blood or something. Did you have any jobs while you were in medical school?
Not in medical school, no. But, I spent the summer on a research project in the Department of Physiology, which helped a little bit. But I did not work in medical school.
So what kind of, what was your work like as a medicine house officer? Did you have to provide all of your own services, EKGs, lab tests, that sort of thing?
Yeah, as an intern, we drew all the blood. We did the CBCs ourselves, started all our IVs, changed the tubing. If we needed to get blood transfusion, we ran to the blood bank with the sample, and then ran back for the blood and administered it. Did all our own EKGs, and often transported patients to X-ray facilities as well. So
I think there was probably a ward lab, was there not? You had a place where you did your own gram stains, that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, right outside the 2418 were the wards. And we did our own urinalysis, of course, as well. Did all our cultures. We took the samples to bacteriology lab, which was probably about half a block to a block away at Barnes, and cultured, set up the cultures ourselves, as I recall. Then they were read by people in the lab, but we did virtual. And I even think I remember at some point inoculating guinea pigs, but that's a vague memory.
It certainly would have been within the purview of duties that other people performed. I've spoken to older physicians who remember doing what they called pigging the sputum. You know, they would take
Yes,
the phlegm and inject it in the guinea pig's peritoneal cavity,
right.
and then extract the pneumococcus that grew out and do the serologic testing to know what antiserum to give in the pre-antibiotic days. So were you helped at all by the medical students in the performance of your duties?
Yeah, that doesn't ring a bell high in my memory. I think my recollection is most of the time we did it ourselves. And, but they may have helped us. It's just not something I recall as occurring, because, I also remember being a medical student there. And I think I watched, but I don't think I had a lot of responsibility at the time.
Was it unusual to be married in your class, or
Yeah, yes. Yeah, we were, I think there are about 80 to 90 students that graduated in our class. And I think probably no more than 10 or so were married at the time. And there were only a very few of us that had children. There was one medical student, Bill Munt, who had been a SAC pilot. He was quite a bit older, and he had several children. We became quite friendly with them. But by the time we all graduated, a great number of students had married. In fact, we were told, Dan, as pre-meds, that medical students who are married, or pre-med students who are married, did not have a very good chance of getting into medical school, and there are virtually none. And so we didn't even announce our marriage until I'd been accepted to medical school.
So did you
turned out not to be true, by the way.
Right. Did you look outside St. Louis for internships?
No, again, we were didn't feel we could afford it, because Jan was my wife, was now raising 2 children with me, and we had no other source of income, and was happy at WashU as for my training. So I really did not look outside of St. Louis.
But now, at the time, I think there were programs that either expressly discouraged or on occasion forbade people from marrying during residency training, although I think that was passing probably by the time you were there. Was Carl Moore your chief of medicine?
Yes, wonderful role model. Actually had a major influence on my career. One of the reasons I chose Washington University, and on the ward service. I'm not sure. Did you train at WashU, Dan?
No, I was at Duke and then went to the Brigham, before I came out here.
Well, I had a lot of, on the ward service, we met pretty frequently with him on rounds, and then morning report was every day, most year of the weekdays throughout the year, and he was also clinically active. He brought patients in from time to time, and he was just a wonderful human being in so many respects. And he, as I said, he helped shape my career.
How so? What did he do that influenced you?
Well, after I finished my first year residency, I joined CDC. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to specialize. Couldn't determine what field I was interested in. They all looked interesting. And one of my residency year ahead of me had been at CDC in the epidemiology branch, and really spoke highly of it. So I thought that'd be a great way to spend 2 years of military equivalent time. I was technically in the Coast Guard as an officer during that time. And there's always a threat of draft. So this was a way of fulfilling that obligation if it became necessary, which it did later with the Cuban Missile Crisis, and also give me 2 years to make up my mind what I wanted to do. So I left and stayed in contact with Dr. Moore. Actually wrote a paper on an investigation I conducted in Alaska. He, I think, probably was impressed, invited me back. I gave, I think, a presentation of my experience, maybe at Grand Rounds, I can't remember. And he then invited me to become the chief resident a year after, in the future. I had by that time decided I wanted to go into either infectious disease or liver disease. I really wanted something clinically strong in training. And when I decided I wanted to train with Jerry Klatskin at Yale, he was a superb clinician and renowned academician in liver disease. I'm sure he contacted me, I asked him to write a letter, and I'm sure that was very influential in my securing that position. And when I came back as chief resident, I had a very, very close relationship with Dr. Moore and Dr. Sherry, Sal Sherry, and then was invited to join the faculty, which I did. Before that, I really was thinking seriously of just going into practice in the community. But I think, again, due to Dr. Moore and Dr. Sherry, I changed my mind. So he had a major impact throughout my throughout my medical school training.
So to clarify, you spent 2 years in Atlanta at the CDC, and then you spent a year or two in New Haven with Klatskin?
I spent 1 year with them in New Haven and then came back as the chief resident and then joined the faculty.
And then immediately after your chief residency, you joined the faculty. And at some point, you became responsible for running the residency program. Do you remember when that was?
Yeah. Carl Moore passed away in 1974 or 5, something like that. Bill Dowday ran the residency program for a year or two until Dave Kipnis became chair. And that would be right around 75, so somewhere in that time. And he asked me to become the director of the residency training program, which I accepted.
Was there anybody that formally did it before Bill Dowday did it? Or was it just done by Dr. Moore?
I think it was Dr. Moore and Dr. Sherry, as a matter of fact, as I recall.
Was Sherry at Barnes at that point, or was he at Jewish?
Yes, no, he was at Barnes. He joined Dr. Moore as the, I guess, associate chairman or vice chairman, and had an office just right across in the same office complex where Dr. Moore and then later Dr. Kipnis was. And so they were on I think it was the 6th floor at Wool Hospital at that time. He previously had been Jewish Hospital.
So I believe Kipnis became chair in '72, and somewhere around there, I think also in '72, they merged the ward service and the private service residency. Were you program director when that happened, or did that happen before you?
No, that was later. It seems like it was later than that, but no, it merged later. The year I was chief resident, Les Garfinkel was the chief resident of the private service, what they called the blue service,
right?
Red service. But I didn't realize Dr. Moore died in '72. Is that when he passed away? I thought it was later.
Yeah, I worked for Dave for 4 or 5 years, and he retired, I think, after 20 years in '92. And I think Moore died in '71 or thereabouts, because I just got done writing a memorial for Jerry Medoff for the Clinical and Oncological Association. And Jerry went and talked to Moore about becoming chief of ID not long before he died. And
Right.
so at any rate, you didn't supervise the merger of the two services then, is that
No,
correct?
that followed my time there.
Okay, all right. And now, so you were a program director there until what, 79 or 80? Is that right?
Yes, until I left in 1980, August of 1980, to go to Baltimore.
And what attracted you to Baltimore, to Sinai? What made you decide that's what you wanted to do?
Well, I had always thought I would stay in St. Louis. Our family all lived in St. Louis, but I was contacted um, by a fellow named Will Madry, actually, at the time,
Sure.
who I knew through field liver disease, and they offered me not only head of medicine at Sinai, but professor of medicine at Johns Hopkins. And it took over a year of negotiations, decision making before I decided to leave. But they what they offered was really very attractive in terms of a relationship between the two departments. Victor McCusick was very supportive. Richard Ross was the dean of the medical school at Hopkins at the time, and he was extremely supportive also. And we arranged to bring residents to Sinai to help with the teaching program, and I was put on a large number of committees at promotions committee, and actually the search committee for the Department of Medicine chair, actually. And so I felt that I was welcomed, gave rounds, and the community was very supportive. The members of the board at Sinai and the staff were very encouraging. So ultimately, I decided and I realized that I was never going to be chairman at Washington U. Because I wasn't academically as inclined. In terms of basic research. Trying to think, maybe other factors, but those were the major factors that led to my decision.
How long were you at Sinai, and how long were you in Baltimore?
9 years. It was quite an adjustment. The house staff program was and I ran the house staff program at Sinai. It was nothing like Barnes. It was very difficult to recruit house interns. We relied heavily on foreign medical graduates, primarily from South Africa, who were extremely well trained physicians. But I was there 9 years. At the time, Maryland was a very controlled state in terms of what each institution was allowed to do. For example, we applied and were rejected from starting an open heart surgery program. And there were a lot of restrictions on the institution.
So what made you decide to leave and go to Cleveland?
Well, I think largely political. The person who, fellow named Spencer Foreman, Spike Foreman, who played a major role in recruiting me to Sinai, moved to become head of medicine, head of the hospital, Montefiore in New York. Mm-hmm. Very effective individual. And his replacement really started downsizing the Department of Medicine because there was an effort to cut back on funds, which I think was understandable in order for the institution to survive. But I saw our department starting to implode to an extent that I wasn't happy. And some of my senior faculty, well, elsewhere, they were easily able to find other positions. And ultimately, I said that this is not really what I wanted to sustain. So I decided that I would move on.
And who recruited you to Cleveland? Do you recall? Was it Nate Berger or?
Well, Nate played a role. He was not he was not the head of dean of the medical school at the time. But the major role was by Adel Mahmoud, who was chairman of the Department of Medicine,
Right.
and the board and head of the hospital at Mount Sinai. And I was offered, be head of that department, also to be vice chairman of the Department of Medicine at Case. And that was attractive. And again, the board was, as I said, was very supportive, and we negotiated for a period of time. And negotiations went well, and I decided to leave.
So when you, throughout your academic career, did you remain active in the treatment of patients with liver disease?
Well, I was less active than I had been at Barnes. I actually, some patients followed me to Baltimore, and I saw patients with liver disease there. And over time, that diminished too. And I maintained outpatient service and did admit some patients at both institutions, more so in Baltimore. And I also maintained a clinical, I had some a major clinical research project, transfusion transmitted viruses study, which, as I recall, I talked about when I was a visiting professor at Washington I think it was 1999, if I remember correctly. And that went with me and was sustained through we had finished accessing patients at Barnes, but we continued the analysis and support from NIH for several years after that. So that was one of the activities besides administering and teaching. I was running the house staff program at Mount Sinai as well for a period of time. Then others took that over as I moved on.
It's really been quite remarkable what's happened in sort of the history of viral hepatitis in the 20th century, 20th and early 21st century.
Oh, it's been revolutionary, actually. I mean, it's a wonderful public health story, as well as clinical story. The eradication, basically, of post-transfusion hepatitis. It was 10% risk when I started. And that was one of the major studies that I embarked on. And as you saw, Harvey Alter was one of the recipients of the Nobel Prize. And we were really doing studies competitively at the time I started. He sustained that.
Yeah, I remember when nobody knew what non-A, non-B hepatitis was, and nobody understood chronic active hepatitis, and so on and so on. And it's just,
right.
We basically here in the St. Louis VA, we basically eliminated hepatitis C. Pretty much everybody's been screened, and everybody who's eligible to be treated has been treated. And for us, of course, it makes perfect economic sense because we own these patients forever. And every patient we treat is somebody that won't get cirrhosis and won't get hepatocellular carcinoma somewhere down the line. So it's really been quite remarkable. I'm old enough that I wasn't alive. I wasn't in medicine at the time, but I certainly came along not too long after the Willowbrook experiments.
Oh, so Krugman.
Yeah, and so I've sort of kind of followed it from that point on. What's been your greatest happiness in medicine, would you say? What have you enjoyed most as an academic internist and leader?
I can't point to any one thing. I enjoyed my career um, in all aspects. Time at Barnes, Washington U was probably the most enjoyable, and largely not only because of my involvement in all these activities, but I really found my fellow academicians, people I worked with, to be really wonderful people and very supportive. My research activities were really not only sponsored, but financially supported to begin with by essentially gifts of Joe Grisham in pathology. Charlie Parker took me into the lab after my rounds and um, let me learn how to do some basic immunological research. And then, just I really enjoyed that immensely. But I think looking back, I enjoyed all aspects of my career, and the fact I could teach, do research, and see patients, and do that pretty much in my own design. Really was very fulfilling.
Are there any proteges of yours that you were involved in training or mentoring that have gone on to bring you pride that come to mind?
Well, there are in the field of liver disease, not a whole lot. As I look back, Bob Perillo, but one of my proteges was a pre-med who I took under my wing, went on to medical school, actually was a pre-med at Washington U, went to St. Louis University. His name was Steve Piper. And Steve went on in the Department of Pathology, trained in pathology, and now is head of the Department of Pathology at Jefferson. And it's had a very successful career. We stay in close contact.
How many children do you have total?
4 children. Actually, this past year has been difficult. My wife passed away last May after 65 years of wonderful marriage. And one of my children, my youngest daughter, has developed a lymphoma.
Sorry.
And it's being now worked up and managed at Stanford. She lives in California. The other 3 live here. And they've been, one of the wisest things we ever did was to move back to St. Louis to be with family. We did that in 2012. And the children here have been wonderful, very supportive.
Did any of them go into medicine?
No, they've had a kind of peri-medical career. One is in charge of works in continuing medical education at St. Louis U. Another worked at Washington University and affiliated hospital. I have a grandson who's now finishing his residency training in pediatrics at Nashville, Vanderbilt, and it's going to be. He's married a fellow resident and she's going to go into pulmonary medicine. He's going into sports medicine. So it skipped a generation, but it's alive and well now in the family.
Well, good for you. Did you? So you've obviously had a long and fruitful career and seen a lot of medicine and a lot of life. If Joe Biden or one of his healthcare advisors called you up and asked for a single piece of advice, what would you tell him?
Well, that's a difficult question. I haven't really thought about it, but I guess I'd like to see us move towards a single carrier system. in a slow transition fashion, I guess, with some option if one wanted to have independent coverage as well. But I think that that's going to be difficult and it's going to take time. But I think that's probably the way I would recommend we go.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think the American College of Physicians feels similarly. They've been advocating for universal healthcare since 1992 or thereabouts, and with universal single payer as one of the options. But I agree with you. I thought that when the Clintons proposed it, they were just too early, because I think, my generation, the boomers, are selfish. And I thought that when we got to be older, we'd be and became more mortal and more frail, we'd be more in support of it, but that hasn't turned out to be the case. I'm guessing, I attended an IHI meeting some years ago when Uwe Reinhardt was still alive, and he projected that by a little after 2030, that healthcare was going to consume 30% of the average person's take-home pay. And that would be unsustainable. So my guess is that it'll be crisis, as opposed to thoughtful, deliberative discussions. It'll be a collapse of some sort. So,
right.
And
think it'll be 2030?
I don't know. Don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know when it'll happen. But I haven't talked to you about this, but I teach in Germany for a couple of weeks every year. And I see their healthcare system, which has universal coverage by a bimodal method, either through employer-based insurance or government-sponsored insurance. And the patients are happy, the doctors are happy. The lengths of stay in the hospital are longer, but the healthcare costs less, if you can believe that, on a per capita basis. And I think, two things that are true there that aren't true are that the health insurance companies are not for profit. And the drug companies are not for profit, and so I think that makes a huge difference.
Right.
If looking back at your long and fruitful life, is there anything you change about it now, or knowing what you know now?
No, not really. I do sometimes wonder what my career path would have been if I'd stayed in St. Louis or Washington U. I left. It was interesting. I left at the time in terms of hepatitis C. The genome had just been characterized, and we predicted that there would be a vaccine based on the genome structure, which did come to pass 8 to 10 years later. And HIV it was just beginning to emerge. I think it was a little bit after I left. And I wondered if I would have moved into that field, which would have been competitive with infectious disease, of course, but would be comparable in some ways to hepatitis. So I don't know. I sometimes wonder, as I said, what my path would have been if I'd stayed in Washington U. But I really don't have any regrets for a variety of reasons. I think looking at the career, it was enjoyable, productive. And I think to a large degree successful.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's been a life well lived. Well, that pretty much concludes what I wanted to ask you. I really want to thank you for doing this. Again, I thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Of course, thank you. Good to see you again.